Thanks so much for joining. My name is Jason Tanko. I serve as the White House liaison for OPM, the Office of Personnel Management. Also previously served as the Deputy Director of the White House Initiative on NHPIs during the Obama administration. I was just reflecting on how we hosted this summit 8 years ago at George Washington. I don't know, was anyone there for that summit? Oh my gosh, you were there, awesome. So it's great to be back. Happy AA NHPI Heritage Month. So great to see you all. We have a really exciting panel today on federal careers. So I have a few questions for you all. Who here currently works for the federal government? Awesome. So thank you. I just wanted to thank all of my colleagues from the federal government. Later on, in about 30 minutes, we're going to have a table talk. You all probably started your table talks already, just giving you all an opportunity to network with various federal agencies. I did want to shout out selfishly my agency, OPM, over there, Theo and Tika. But really, all of these federal agencies and opportunities have really just great opportunities, internship opportunities, fellowships, jobs, both career, political. So really looking forward to that. Raise your hand if you've previously worked for the federal government. Not currently, but previously. All right, awesome. And then raise your hand if you are interested in working for the federal government or want a job or internship. Okay, great. You all came to the right workshop. So since we have just 30 minutes, I'd love to dive right in. We have a panel of representatives who have served in a number of different roles in the federal government. So they're here to talk about their experiences. And then again, in about 30 minutes, we'll launch into the table talks. So with that, I'd actually like to turn it over to my panelists. If you could just briefly introduce yourselves, share a little bit about yourself, and including where you're currently working, starting with Jill.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. This is beautiful to see so much current government employees. First of all, I just want to thank you for your service. Next week is Public Service Recognition Week, but we can do it early. So I'm with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. I am a director of an office called Office for Strategic Initiatives. Essentially, whatever the secretary, the deputy secretary wants to cook up in terms of implementing HUD's mission, I am the one that executes it and operationalizes it in all our 64 field offices. I came to the federal government, oh man, I was counting this too. I was like, I started actually as a presidential management fellow in 2014. Actually, that's how I came to meet Jason. I was in that fellowship program. I did a brief detail with the then White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. I was the main liaison and advisor to the initiative on behalf of housing policy. Prior to federal service, I'll just share a little bit of my background. I was a first grade and kindergarten teacher through Teach for America. Thank you. Shout out to all the educators out there for sure. I thought I was going to do that for life. There was, just life changes. I ended up going to law school. From law school, I was exposed and learned a little bit more about the PMF program. And then from there realized it's a very great development program to get me into an executive and management role. And close to almost 10 years later, after I started the program, I am now a GS-15 manager, and it really accelerated my career to get to this position. If it had not been for the PMF program, I don't know if I would be at this high-level position so quickly in my career. But anyways, I'll just share one last thing. I'm so proud to be in this event, mostly because representation in the government that looks like this room is incredibly rare. I was actually just texting with a fellow manager. We are, right after this, I have to jet to a manager's meeting, and she literally entered in a room full of men. And not just any men, men who are not necessarily from diverse backgrounds. I am from an agency who really values equity and really tries to diversify and make sure we have inclusive communities in our services. However, I do often walk in a room where there are literally, I will count, 5 Asian people. Of the 5 Asian people, there's 1 Asian woman. That 1 Asian woman is me. So anyways, for you to be in this space, it's important. I want to definitely welcome the questions. I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you. So.
Thank you, Jill. Sunny?
Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay in the back? My name is Sunny Patel. I serve as a senior medical advisor at SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Agency at administration at Health and Human Services. I'm part of this panel because I completed a program called the White House Fellowship, which is for largely mid-career folks to get exposure to sort of a high-level exposure to how the executive branch works and functions, and playing a critical role either with a White House principal or a cabinet secretary for a year. I'm a medical doctor by trade. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I was placed at the Department of Homeland Security, which you would wonder what's a shrink doing at Homeland Security. Interestingly enough, there's lots of one of the benefits of the White House Fellows Program, I'm happy to talk about it more in the Q&A, but it's a rare opportunity for individuals from lots of different backgrounds to learn and contribute in ways that wouldn't necessarily traditionally be available. And for me to get a perspective on national security and to be able to provide expertise on sort of public health matters in the midst of a global pandemic was really important. I think an important and transformative opportunity for myself. And at SAMHSA, my role largely focuses on issues related to mental health financing. So how do we make the dollars work to get the services where they need to be, and programs for children, youth, and families. Largely, which have been sort of highlighted in sort of stark relief in the context of the pandemic by the Surgeon General's advisory on youth and children, youth, and families and their mental health. So I'm excited to be here. I think the public service bug caught me, and for those who are thinking about it, happy to be supportive and provide any insights that would be helpful. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, Sunny.
Thanks, Jason. Can everyone hear me? Great. I'm Ken Moy, and I'm the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs. And so the longer the title, the less power you have, I think. My main duty, though, is to help our Assistant Secretary oversee the management of foreign relations with more than 30 countries in East Asia, from China to North Korea. Actually, we don't have diplomatic relations with North Korea, but Japan, Korea. Last week, some of you may have seen the results of our work on the state visit by President Yoon of South Korea, but all the way down to Australia and New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. I've been a Foreign Service officer. In other words, thank you, I'll speak up. In normal parlance, we are diplomats. We are your diplomats, American diplomats, and I've been in the Foreign Service for 31 years now, and I am now what they regard as a career minister rank, which doesn't mean that I should be wearing a clerical collar. It does mean that in military parlance, I guess, it would be a 3-star general, and so I have been honored to work on behalf of you overseas. Most of our professionals, Foreign Service officers, and there are about 8,000 of us as generalists, and there are another 5,000 who are specialists. And we are outward facing. Most of our careers are spent overseas. In the State Department, we teach you languages so you can go overseas and serve. We teach you what you need to know to be diplomats. Sometimes we're in tough negotiations with countries like Russia and China. And sometimes we are looking at our economic relations with countries like Brazil and South Africa, most recently. And I came into the Foreign Service just interested in foreign affairs. I caught the bug when I was just a teenager, and my parents took our family to China, which at the time sounded like one of the worst ideas if you're like a teenager and you're playing baseball in the summers and all this. So we're gonna decamp in thousands of miles away, 12 time zones away. But that's what we did. And interestingly enough, I thought, wow, this is a pretty interesting place. China just coming out of the Cultural Revolution back in the late 70s. But I came in by taking the Foreign Service exam. There are many, many ways of getting into the State Department. Jill talked about President Management Fellows. That's another way of getting it. There are other fellows, Pickering Fellows, Rango Fellows. We have diplomatic security. There's so many different types of careers that you can find doing foreign affairs. Some of us spend a vast majority of our careers overseas, but some of us are here in Washington as civil service colleagues as well. I'm happy to discuss that. I do want to give a shout out to Darian Akins, our diplomat in residence here. Raise your hand, Darian. And he is really the resident expert on all things State Department. We'd love to have you join us because, among other things, I know you're all really smart and talented and all that, but for those who are interested in serving your country, and I tell people, I come from Minnesota. Everywhere I go in the world, and that's more than 100 countries in my career, I take a little bit of Minnesota with me. I take a little bit of my background with me. Last night we were having laughs. I was at it was an event, the Asian American Foreign Affairs Association in the State Department. We were having laughs because among us, sort of East Asians, South Asian, East Asians, we were talking about how humble our backgrounds were. We were having a competition to see who had the humblest background. Oh, my dad keeps on telling me he came with like $13 in his pocket, And another one would say, oh, I got that beat. My father, $9. It's pretty amazing stories all around. And I told people on my birth certificate, I was born in Hong Kong, on my birth certificate, under my father's occupation, it says laundry service delivery man, right? He wasn't even up to the level of the laundry service. He was just delivering the laundry. That's how humble my background is. But anyway, I am really proud to be among all of you, and it is just a wonder. When I came into the federal government, into the State Department in 1992, there were roughly 1% of us were Asian Americans. Today, it's between 7 and 8%. So I've seen in my 30 years, my 3 decades of the federal government service, these types of changes. We'd love to have you in the State Department. Please think about us.
Awesome. Thank you all. Really, so as you can see, we have a really great mix of opportunities represented on the panel. We have the Foreign Service, we have White House Fellows, we have the Presidential Management Fellows, and of course later on with the table talks. Could you all actually share maybe one memorable experience, story that you have from your programs that you'd love to share with the group? And actually, Ken, if you have one, I'd love to start with you and go this way.
Oh man. Diplomats oftentimes, and we're not like colleagues in the Defense Department. We can't point to tanks and aircraft carriers and those kinds of things. Those are like muscle jobs, right? Our stories are about the words. For us, on our organization, words matter. And sometimes when we're talking to foreign countries, sometimes the difference can just be one word. And so I'll try to make this story short. There's a much longer version of this that I won't, that we don't have time to get into. But about 20 years ago, one of our aircraft collided with a Chinese PRC aircraft over this island called Hainan in part of China. And the pilot died, the Chinese pilot died. We were miraculously able to, or the pilot of our aircraft was miraculously able to navigate safely down to Hainan Island, but they were captured, and so the crew was captured. Anyway, we spent a week negotiating with the Chinese over how we would extricate our crew from China and bring them back to the United States. And in those negotiations, in the end, it wound up being the difference over the definition of the word sorry. You may know that in other languages, there are many ways of saying things, right? It just happens that in the Chinese language, there are many ways to say sorry. Everything from excuse me, pardon me, to I'm expressing the deepest, deepest regret. And my memory was the time we spent agonizing over how we would express our sorrow, knowing that we wanted to get our crew out of there as soon as possible, because in the American media, it was depicted as American hostages in China, not released yet. Day to day, they would be reporting on this. Anyway, to make again, there's a longer version of this story, but in the end, it wound up that we took the weaselly diplomatic way out. We let the Chinese define sorry themselves in their own language. Meanwhile, we simply used our word. But it was a way, it just was a way for two sides who had very, very different views, very different perspectives of one incident. It was a way to find some kind of accommodation both sides made in order to release our U.S. air crew. Anyway, that's my memory of diplomacy.
So I have two very quick sort of ones. Was it the highlights of the memorable experience? I think there's sort of the high level of memorable experience where you tell people I'm a White House fellow, or you tell your family members, and my mom, who has like no idea what any of this is, and probably like many of your parents, like no idea what you do during the day. I'm a doctor, but she also doesn't know what I do during the day. But I was like, you see doctors, like, but that's all right. And I think in her vision, it was like, oh, you must just like spend time with POTUS every day. And you're like, yeah, that's like exactly what we do. We don't, but one of the opportunities that we have was to meet with President Biden, and generally it happens once or twice in a White House Fellows year. And we were supposed to meet with him for 15 minutes, which turned into 2.5 hours. And we were talking to someone about this after, and they're like, oh, you entered the Biden vortex. And in all the best ways. And I think it was to be, the White House Fellowship year is a leadership year principally. Like, it's to see how senior leaders operate, how they lead, how they inspire, and how do they set vision and execute. And I think for me, in the same ways that Ken spoke about words that matter, I think the way you show up matters, and the authenticity that senior leaders bring to the table really shines. And I think for me, it was a really good example of how do you be present. It's also an example of how do you stress the rest of your staff out potentially by blowing up your schedule. But I think there are some things that like are just so important, and if and where you put your time reflects that. And so that was just a big personal lesson. I think personally, my biggest growth and thing that excited me about the year was something I didn't expect, which was an intellectual and a very personal deep dive into the civilian-military divide. And I made the best of friends with my friends in the Army and the Navy and the Air Force. I probably, in no preference order. And I just think without this fellowship year, I wouldn't have had that experience with, with mid-career officers, and our children are the best of friends, our families are, we spend a ton of time together, and I just have a deep and profound sort of gratitude to the service and sacrifice. And so for those of you who served in the armed forces, I'm grateful as a citizen. And so that was a deeply transformative part of the year. And I think it's the relationships that you build with one another, that there are really important and sort of high-level engagements, but it's the relationships with folks around you that are important. And so I think the two big things to sum is how you sort of spend your time is sort of where your values lie, and how you treat the people around you and build community are the things that sort of have stuck with me.
A lot shorter than on my right. So I think I'll start with like the takeaway. The takeaway from this experience was being the trusted voice with communities, because oftentimes communities don't trust the federal government. Oh, lots of nods. Okay, so this experience actually just happened very, very recently. Anyone familiar with or know where Lowell, Massachusetts is? Any chance? Oh, okay, great. Are folks from there? Any chance? Okay, from Massachusetts area. So I was actually just part of my job. One of like the benefits of my job is I get to visit really amazing, beautiful communities that I probably would never get a chance to. And they're not large metropolitans. They're smaller, smaller populations, sometimes rural. And this most recent visit was to Lowell, Massachusetts just last month, and I visited the Housing Authority. Didn't know anything about Lowell. I remember I was in a car with my staff, and I was literally on Wikipedia like, where are we going? Like, what's the population? What's the federal investments? You know, just some quick numbers. And pleasantly to learn that Lowell is the second largest Cambodian refugee settlement in the U.S. I'm actually from Southern California, live close to Long Beach, which is the biggest Cambodian refugee settlement in the U.S. And so I was really jazzed up. I had no idea. I wish my staff prepared me, but I was like really excited to learn a little bit more about this community. And so going there, I met the executive director. He is Cambodian American. In just learning a little bit more about his experience, he started off as a translator on behalf of the Housing Authority for the community, and then worked his way up to executive director position. That was probably one of my most memorable experiences. I'm going to always remember because in a room of federal government employees, he was speaking directly to me and only to me because I was somebody that looked very familiar to him. And it was through that type of representation, I was able to disarm a little bit. He did share like openly, like he was, not to say he was distrusting of the federal government, but he didn't understand how the federal government can serve and really invest in the communities because all he's known was how they had to survive, how they had to be scrappy, how they worked together. I bring that here to this conversation because faces like us, representation, diverse voices, the physicalities, yes, it's important, but it's also remembering and knowing these histories whenever you come across these communities. And this is domestic, right? Like we have so much of this nation that we're so proud of, and there are definitely voices that are not often heard. And so for me, little on me, didn't think my presence was that very important, but I was representing this grand agency in his eyes. It meant so much to this person as well as his staff, and I'm just grateful. It reminded me that whenever I'm in these spaces, that I'm in these spaces representing somebody, I'm also in these spaces listening to learn, right? Like how can we in the federal government do better, right? How can we be better servants to the public? Because those are ultimately the clients and those are ultimately the customers that we serve.
Thank you all for sharing those stories. So we have about 7 minutes left in the panel, so I have time for probably about 2 more questions left. Can you all actually talk about the application process for your program? So PMF White House Fellows, the Foreign Service, just what folks need to prepare from the resume, process to the interview process, references, just any best practices about, for everyone here, really, if you're ever going for a job, what sort of advice you have around that process. So any of you, feel free to start.
I can do a quick, I distinctly remember ours because it's just so involved and led to a lot of uncertainty in our life. And I'll explain very quickly. My wife was pregnant at the time while we were applying, and we're like, where do we move to DC? Will we have to find a new OB? So there was a lot that we were figuring out. But the White House Fellowship has a written application that you apply. There's, I think, 3 or 4 letters that you get. And then there's a regional interview. There's 10 regions, and so there's generally about 10 people per regional interview. And then there's a national sort of finals that happen generally in the DMV. And so people fly in from everywhere, and that's about 30 people. And then by executive order, the fellowship was established by Lyndon B. Johnson in the 60s. The executive order says there's 11 to 19 sort of spots, and so there's a presidential commission, and so it's a 1-year presidential appointment for 11 to 19 people from all walks of American life, So any profession you may be, you're qualified. I think the only restriction is you can't be a current employee of the federal government. But that's sort of the nuts and bolts. And if anyone ever is thinking about applying, please reach out. We'd be happy to chat. For me, it was a seed planted over a decade ago, while someone I knew was applying to the White House Fellowship, that sort of took a decade to germinate. And I think the imposter syndrome runs deep. You are, by presence of whatever you have done, you're qualified to apply.
I just remembered. So for the PMF program, because the program changes every year, just slightly. But I do remember my year we had an in-person interview, and there was a panel, maybe 3 or 4 folks, and just staring at me, like literally just sitting right in front of me, and I had to answer these generic questions because it's very government. You have to keep it standard. But the biggest takeaway before I prepared for the interview, a mentor of mine recommended come prepared with stories to share and to diversify your responses to the questions, and make sure your responses, your stories, you utilize the STAR method. Are we familiar with the STAR method, right? Like situation, I had to Google it. Situation, what was the situation? Task, what goal were you working toward? Action, what did you take? And then what was the result of your action, right? And then choosing different types of stories, because when they ask you the question, sometimes those questions, you can use the same story and then change it up. But when you diversify the types of your experiences, you paint this really beautiful and holistic, comprehensive picture of who you are and what you can bring to the table. I'm assuming it worked. I was a PMF and got selected. This PMF process is also very, very selective. I think, is it 4%? I don't remember, I'm looking at OPM over here because they're the one that runs it. But it's incredibly selective. But anyways, that's my biggest takeaway for the PMF program. Probably and applicable to any other type of interviews.
Yeah, thanks very much. For the State Department, because we have so many employee categories, I think the best thing to do is to refer you to USA Jobs or careers.state.gov. That will give you some insight about the range of jobs, and there are many that are based in Washington. For what I do as a Foreign Service officer, there is an examination process, and if I recall correctly, Darian, it's a 2-step process where you do take a written exam, which involves actually writing a personal statement and providing some resume background. And then there's those who pass the written portion of the exam will graduate to the oral examination. And I think, as always, the only, I do tell people that general knowledge is a great thing to have when you take this written exam, but also communication. It doesn't matter what branch of government you're in. I think that those who are able to articulate ideas precisely in a very kind of organized way, they have a leg up on others. Also in written communication as well. As I noted earlier in my career, I've seen it happen so often. Words matter, and when it comes down to expressing yourself, trying not to offend someone from a foreign country, for example, trying to make sure that you are understood in a way, because so much, you don't represent yourself. In my career, even though I introduce myself by name, I represent the United States, and it's a much larger thing than just myself. And so every single word matters, and how I comport myself in front of foreign audiences matter. So communication.
Yeah. And I agree with that. If I could add on, as moderator's privilege in my day job as White House liaison, I interview a lot of candidates, and sometimes, fortunately, some of those candidates ramble on Zoom interviews. So my one piece of advice, please check, if you're speaking too long, just make sure that your answers are comprehensive, but also concise, especially in virtual interviews, is what I've seen. So that actually takes us to our last question. We are right at time, so I just wanted to, again, thank our panelists. We have a really exciting table talks next, but if I could actually close just with one final question in 30 seconds or less. What advice would you have for people interested in pursuing a career in the federal government?
Do it. Concise.
Yeah, it is concise. Be persistent. Sometimes you're not going to get it the first go around, but keep on trying because there is a place for you. There is a place for your talents.
Ask why. So if you are pursuing a position in government and perhaps you're using USA Jobs or what have you and you don't get selected, figure out why. Solicit feedback. It never hurts to just ask the question of how can I improve. It also helps build an impression with the HR hiring person, sometimes it's me, to know that you are actually genuinely passionate about the position and want to learn how to improve. So do it.
All right. With that, can everyone help me give a round of applause to our panelists? All right. Thank you all so much, and I will turn it over to my colleague Zane. Okay.
Thank you so much to Jason, our moderator, Jill, Sunny, and Ken. So what we're going to do now is we have a series of other very experienced federal employees at each of your tables. And so what I'm going to do is first let them do quick introductions of each of the folks on your table. If you can just say 3 very quick things: your name, your current agency, and your years of service in federal government. Let's start at the back with Department of Ed and PHS.
I'm Lieutenant Brooke Marshall. I'm with the United States Public Health Service. I've been an officer in the Public Health Service for about almost 5 years now. But basically, we are one of the 8 uniformed services. We help protect, promote, and enhance the safety and public health of our nation.
Good morning, everyone. This is Jane Wood from Department of Education. Actually, I've been working with federal agencies for about 9 years. Oh my God, it's a long time. So prior come to Department of Education, I worked with U.S. Secret Service, and prior to that, Department of the Navy. Thank you.
Hand it over there to OPM.
Hi everyone, my name is Theo Chang. I'm serving as an appointee in the Office of the Director at the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, which is the federal government's HR and people agency. And I have served in other roles at other agencies total for about 7 years.
Hi, it's nice to meet you all. My name is Tika Carlson, and I'm also a political appointee at the Office of Personnel Management. I'm a special assistant to the director, and I have 2 years of federal service.
And next table, state and GSA.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Darian Akins. I'm a senior foreign service officer. Ken is a 3-star. I'm a 1-star, so he's the boss.
Something to aspire to.
Exactly. That's what I'm aiming for. And I've been in the served 6 different posts overseas and twice here in Washington, D.C. So.
Elliot.
Hi. Hi, how you doing? My name is Elliot Dooms. I am a political appointee at the U.S. General Services Administration. I serve as the regional administrator here for the National Capital Region. GSA is the government's landlord, as well as providing services. And I have a combined 19 years in the federal government, about 18 in Congress, and just started at GSA earlier this year.
If you want to hand it over here. AmeriCorps Peace, or, okay, go ahead.
Aloha kahiaka kako o ko'ino o Kadara Marshall. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kadara Marshall. I work in the Office of Presidential Personnel as a political appointee. Everyone in the panel are really great career servants. I am the office that hires for political appointees across the administration.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Raquel Fawcett. I work in the White House office. I'm the director of the White House Internship Program, and I've been in the federal service for about a year now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sonali Nijawan. I serve as the director for AmeriCorps at the agency, AmeriCorps. And I'm a political appointee and have been in federal service for 2 years and 3 months. Who's counting?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jackie Deneen. I am the Deputy Chief of Staff at the Peace Corps. I have served in federal government for about 10 years now, serving currently as a Biden appointee, also served in the Obama administration as an appointee, and then served on Congress, so with Senator Lincoln Chafee for Rhode Island. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much. So what we're going to do now is, oh, sorry.
Hi, I'm Siyu Mo. I'm from the Office of National Cyber Director at the White House. I'm an appointee. I'll be at the office for 6 months. I'm pretty new, so I'm really very happy to share and be here today.
Thank you for coming.